What's going on, everyone? So we have a ton of cards to go over. I decided not to do this like daily showcase 1 to 2 cards. Instead, I wanted to wait a few days, get a massive bunch of cards, and then just talk about them all in one video. It's gonna be a little bit of a longer one, but there's a lot of exciting cards to talk about. We actually saw FFG play the starter decks against each other. So the Moff Gideon starter and the Mando starter were actually able to be played against each other on live stream. So we were able to see a ton of new cards, and well, we have all of them in the card list here that we got to talk about. Not only that, we also have a bunch of exclusive reveals from various content creators and Twitter posts and things like that. So without further ado, if you want to pick up any of these cards, guys, I have a TCG player link in the description down below. It helps me out if you use it, and it helps you out a little bit as well. Let's start off here, talk about our new leaders. The first one being Lando Calrissian. Now, this is really unique, as he is the second 4 to deploy leader in the game. Obviously, the first one is going to be Sabine, and she is very much aggro centric. Now, the thing that makes Sabine so oppressive and why she's one of the strongest decks and leaders in the game right now is because she comes out so early in conjunction with playing a lot of the really powerful heroism aggro cards. Now, Lando has an option to do that, but in a different way. He, with his action ability, can allow you to cheat on resources, sort of like a Han Solo, but a lot earlier on into the game, allowing you to kind of just outvalue your early turns and tempo out your opponent. So what do we got here? We have, as I mentioned, a 4 to deploy leader, but his action ability is exhaust this leader, action exhaust, and then play a card using smuggle. So you must have some sort of smuggle card in your resource pile, right? You cannot smuggle out something that's in your hand. You have to have it in your resource pile. It costs 2 less resources, and then you must defeat a resource you own and control. This is a heavy drawback, but a really big payoff. Now, if you look at what this leader does, essentially, the first 2 times that you've used this action ability, you are ahead on resources. By the time you've used this a 3rd time, you are now breaking even overall on resources over the course of the game, because the previous or the following turns after you've used this action ability, you would have had +1 resource that would have readied up for you. And so as soon as you use this twice, you're still ahead, and then you kind of have to use it a 3rd time, because if you're not, then, well, you are just playing like 2 less resource worth of cards. So you kind of still have to keep using it, and the more you keep using it, the more you fall behind. So it's really sort of a tempo, early game, try to get out ahead of your opponent and, kill them before you can actually, before they can actually recover from, your aggression or your massive plays. Now, the way I think this card's going to play out is you want to wait till 4 resources, because you want to get the backside of Lando out. If you use this before turn 3, well, you're going to not get to your leader until it's probably just not at all something that is relevant on the board. A 2/5 is not extremely relevant. And the nice thing about his backside is he has the action ability, but it does not require you to exhaust this leader. And so you could actually attack with him for whatever relevant reason that might be. And you could also use the action ability, which is quite nice, and it kind of reinforces the point as to you want to deploy him so that you can go ahead and, use all of the resources that you can use in your resource pile, both with the actual resource costs and the smuggle ability, and then also get in with some damage for Lando so that you can pump just a little bit extra into your opponent. Now, we haven't seen like extremely powerful smuggle units, right? Because the way I think about this, if you're smuggling out events, they better be some insane events in order for you to actually get ahead on this action ability. The way I see this is you really need units, right? Because you need to smuggle something out early, just like, Han can go turn 1 Millennium Falcon, turn 1 Ezra. This is something that Lando needs to do. Maybe not on turn 1, but on turn 2, turn 3. My suggestion would be turn 3 in order for you to really get some value out of him. But the problem with this is if that smuggled unit or smuggled whatever can be dealt with, you are so far behind and you've basically just lost the game. So while he is cool, I don't actually think that this is going to line up quite well against the meta right now. Not only that, but you also need to get the specific smuggle cards that actually can allow you to leverage the 2 resource cost reduction in order for you to even get value at all. And so it's very situational. It is powerful, but I don't know if it's going to line up well in the meta right now. The other leader we got is Hondo Ohnaka. Nice little command villainy. Lando is cunning heroism, by the way. But Hondo Ohnaka as command villainy. When you play a card using smuggle, you may exhaust this leader. If you do, give an experience token to a unit. So a pretty interesting one, as I do find that the villainy smuggle cards seem to be a little bit stronger. And right now, I think that there's a lot of options that you could go with in order to get a lot of value here from the experience tokens. Now, we really need to see the backside of a lot of these units. If they don't have good stats, then a lot of the times the leaders just can't really be used. And we've seen this very frequently with some of the poorer statted units, our leaders. But Hondo Ohnaka, 6 to deploy, a 3/7, so pretty bad in terms of just space stats. But he does have raid 1. So essentially, he's like a 6 to deploy, 4/7 on attacks, which is like above average to above average, right? I mean, if you compare it to Boba Fett, it looks pretty bad because he's a 5 resource, 4/7 straight up. But I would say Hondo Ohnaka is probably like just about average in terms of what I would expect out of a 6 deploy leader at this point in the game. And well, when you play a card using smuggle, you may give an experience token to a unit. So we still have the kind of experience token off of smuggling out a lot of stuff. Here's the thing. I don't know if we're going to have enough smuggling payoffs and reasons to play smuggle cards for you to get a lot of value out of this. There could be. We haven't seen the whole set, but you need 2 things for this to be relevant. 1, you need a unit on the battlefield. 2, you need a smuggle card that you want to play in order for you to give an experience token to that unit. And even if you do, is that actually good enough to use this leader? It might be. If we have the combination of we can actually put out early game units and they don't just die while also playing those smuggle cards, well, we got something going for it. And I believe if you play out a unit using smuggle, you're able to give an experience token to that unit that was smuggled out. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section down below, but I was reading through the rules and I believe that's how it's going to work, which is kind of interesting. So if there are some really powerful smuggle units, then yeah, I could see this being a quite powerful leader. I'm just a little bit disappointed with the backside. I think it's like, again, average. Average is not normally good enough for you to be using a leader in any specific set. So those are the 2 leaders, but we have a lot of cards to talk about, and let's dive into it. First off, we got to talk about the client. This is a 2/5/3 resource vigilance villainy ground unit, shielded Imperial official, and has action. Exhaust this unit, choose a unit for this phase. It gains bounty, heal 5 damage from a base. This looks so powerful. And what I'm imagining is it's going to be really powerful in your more mid-range style of decks that wants to get out units, kind of back it up with the ability to get to that mid game. And this is going to help you get to that mid game. Can it work in control? I also think it could work quite well in control in specific styles of decks. You could also just play this out and then have the goal of it kind of dying, but maybe you get 1 trigger off this, like, okay, yeah, the client's gonna die. It's got shielded, which does prevent it from dying from certain things, but it still dies to, you know, potentially like a Sabine Wren with like surprise strike or something like that, for example. And then Sabine Wren lives, so you know that would be essentially saving, you know, 6 damage on your base, which, you know, could be relevant, and that might be worth the 3 resources. But of course, if you compare it to like a Power of the Dark Side, you might have been able to just power the dark side away Sabine Wren, and then you would have saved the 6 damage anyways, and now Sabine Wren's still on the battlefield. So I don't know if control is going to be like the perfect home, but I do see this being a really, really nice card for mid-range decks that want to get to that mid-range point as sort of like an option against control. And it's not a terrible body on its own. A 2/5, it really usually wants like that 3rd point of power. But a 2/5 is totally fine. Usually you want about 7, you know, stat points worth of stats at a 3 drop. Next up, we have a couple of, you know, more lower rarity cards, I guess you could say. This was an uncommon, but we got a couple commons here in Clan Wren Rescuer, a 2 resource ground unit, Vigilance Heroism 1/2. When played, give an experience token to a unit. It's important to realize that you can give an experience token to the card itself, so you can make this into a 2/3 worst case scenario. Now, this card looks interesting mainly because we have upgrade synergies, right? And so the units that care about upgrades on them, or anything that cares about upgrades, this gives you essentially a 1/2 with an upgrade attached to it, so you don't need 2 separate cards, which could be really, really impactful. And I could see this being the premier 2 resource play in any sort of upgrade themed deck. As again, you don't lose anything realistically because you don't have to play 2 cards in order to trigger your upgrade synergies. Next one, we have Queel. A 2 resource Vigilance Heroism ground unit 2/3 with Restore 1. On attack, discard a card from your deck. If it shares an aspect with your base, return it to your hand, which is really, really sweet. So if you're in a monocolored deck, or if you have, blue as your cards in your deck, then guess what? This is just on attack, draw a card, right? But oftentimes it's going to be a draw card, 60% of the time, 50% of the time, whatever it is, that you've built your deck with. Restore 1 on a 2/3, pretty nice, and the draw card is pretty good as well. I'm liking this card. Again, this looks like a very good mid-range card. I think this works well perfectly in like a Luke style of deck, right? Where you could get this guy down, you could draw some extra cards, maybe you can leverage those extra cards. I see this guy being pretty prominent as a nice little option as a 2 resource turn 1 play. Next up, we have a 3 resource Vigilance Heroism ground unit 2/2. Pretty mediocre, but with Sentinel and Shielded. So this one's interesting, as the reason why you want this guy is Shielded, right? It could soak up a lot of damage. The big problem is that it's a 2/2, okay? If this was a 3/2, I would be like, oh yeah, this card's great. Love this card. It's going to trade with so many different things, sort of like 7th Fleet Defender, right? But this is a 2/2. And to me, that's a huge downside. On your 3 drop, again, you want 7 points of stats, and right now we have 4. That's really, really poor, and it really just trades poorly with a lot of different options in the game. And so I'm not really seeing this card being extremely relevant unless you have specific shielded synergies or specific upgrade synergies. And that's where something, a little bit of a conversation comes in, as if you get some bonuses from upgrades on the battlefield or get some bonuses from having shields on the battlefield, that's when this Village Protectors becomes something like, oh, maybe we could do something cool with it. But right now, I'm not really that impressed with the Village Protectors. Let's see what the next one is. We got to go down a little bit. We have HWK290 Freighter, just a 2/5 space unit, 3 costed Vigilance unit. Is this guy going to be worth it? I don't think so. If you look at a lot of the other space units in the game right now, what you really are looking for is 3 points of power or some sort of really nice ability that it comes into play. If you look at this, compared to like 7th Fleet Defender, yes, it'll eventually trade with 7th Fleet Defender, but you just have 1 point less of power. It doesn't give you Sentinel, so it doesn't prevent damage from you. So you eventually are just trading with your own actions. I'm not a huge fan of this guy. I think he's pretty mediocre, but that's what, commons are for, I suppose. Next one, we have a 5 resource space unit, Vigilance Survivor's Gauntlet here, in a 4/6, pretty sweet. When played on attack, you may attach an upgrade to a unit to another eligible unit controlled by the same player. This card looks amazing. By the way, this is not a unique unit, which is really, really relevant, as sometimes, you can deploy multiple of the same units, and this one's not a unique, which kind of looks like it should be, but a 5 resource 4/6 is pretty good, right? It's a pretty good rate, as if you look at the other, for example, Fett's Fire Spray comes down at 6, and it's a 5/6, right? So this is actually really, really solid stats for a space unit. And the ability to move upgrades around can be extremely relevant, right? You can very easily move a shield token to Survivor's Gauntlet. You can move an experience token to Survivor's Gauntlet, make it a 5/7, right? There are a lot of different options that if you're playing this card, you probably will have one of those upgrades on the battlefield. And I could see this being a really, really nice game ender threat for the upgrade style of deck. You could also just move something around, maybe get some value there. There's the Vigilant Pursuit Craft. I think we talked about this one in the past, but Public Enemy, a newer one. We have a 0 resource upgrade in Vigilance. Attach unit gains bounty, give a shield token to a unit. So you play this on, your opponent's units, you kill it, and then boom, you go ahead and give one of your units a shield token. That's really, really powerful, especially in the upgrade themed deck. And of course, if you're playing with Luke, I could see this Public Enemy being pretty nice as well, as you could have a lot of shield synergies there. But overall, just kind of like a plain, 0 resource, high value, upgrade that if you cash it in, gives you a lot of value for your units. I think that with these 0 costed cards, and a lot of them, like right now, we don't really have that many 0 costed cards. Like a Metal Ceremony is like the key one, right? In fact, I don't even, off the top of my head, I'm kind of trying to think of another 0 costed card. I don't know of any. It might just be Metal Ceremony, but a lot of these 0 costed upgrades and events that they're coming out with are going to make things like drawing a card more impactful. And if you look at something like Queel, for example, that we talked about earlier, you put this bounty on something, you kill something with Queel, you get to draw another card, and suddenly, these cards that you're drawing turn into direct advantages. Like essentially, with this, card in your deck, Public Enemy, Quail turns into, on attack, give a shield token to a unit. That could potentially kind of have that synergy, right? That's the type of thing you need to think about when you're looking at these zero costed upgrades or zero costed cards in general, is how they work with having more and more what's it called cards in your deck, and or cards that you can kind of cycle through. Next up, we have a 1-cost upgrade in Foundling. Attached unit gains the Mandalorian trait, and it gives you +1/+1. I don't know how relevant the Mandalorian trait's going to be overall, in terms of, are you going to want to play non-Mandalorian cards in your deck and then play Foundling in order to give them the Mandalorian trait to synergize with your Mandalorian cards, right? That's what I mean. I think the Mandalorian trait's going to be relevant. It's just, do you want to play non-Mandalorian cards and this card to make it a Mandalorian? And if you're just looking at the +1/+1, we have a lot of better upgrades that do something better than that. So I don't really see this card being particularly amazing. There's a Resilient, a little bit of a reprint. We have Top Target. We talked about that previously. We have Mandalorian Armor. So this is a 2-resource Vigilance upgrade. You get to, when played, if attached unit is a Mandalorian, give a shield token to it, and +1/+3 for that unit. +1/+3, that's definitely a very solid defensive stat line. And if you're getting the shield token, this is a very powerful upgrade. Not to mention, this is not a unique upgrade, so you can give this multiple times to something, which is really, really nice. But shield tokens are extremely powerful, especially since this is going to act as an upgrade, and then the shield token is going to act as an upgrade, and you're going to get +1/+3. So if you play this on like a Follower of the Way, for example, where are you, Follower of the Way? Where'd you go? I don't know. I do not know where the Follower of the Way is. Come on. Where are you? Mandalorian. You're going to give him +1/+3. So he's going to become a 2/6 plus the +1 from himself. He's going to become a 3/7, right? With a shield token. That's pretty powerful, right? So I do think that if you're going to be able to synergize this with, some upgrade synergies, I think it's going to be a very powerful card. Then we have Vambrace Grapple Shot, 2-resource upgrade in Vigilance, attached to a non-vehicle unit. On attack, exhaust the defender, gives +2/+2. This card looks really interesting at first glance, but I think it's actually really poor. And the reason why is, if you're attacking something with +2/+2 in the earlier stages of the game, or even in the middle stages of the game, you're probably going to kill it. So exhausting the defender doesn't really do anything. The one exception is if you have some sort of thing that works with, having your opponent's units being exhausted. Boba Fett. This could synergize with that, but I don't know if you really want to be playing this card to make Boba Fett better, right? It's like a weak card that makes a good card better. Oftentimes, the common, phrase is, don't put bad cards in your deck to make your good cards better. And that's kind of how I feel about Vambrace Grapple Shot. Next one up, we have Fell the Dragon. Wait, I skipped one, didn't I? We have Unexpected Escape. We have a 1-resource event Vigilance. Exhaust, you may rescue a captured card guarded by that unit. This one looks pretty interesting, as I think this will work really, really well against especially like Mandalorian himself, right? You put Mandalorian's rifle on Mandalorian, so then you can exhaust it, you can rescue that unit. Because normally, a lot of the units that are going to be capturing units are going to be really easy to kill, but getting it on a leader, for example, is going to be a lot more difficult. So this might be able to counter some sort of capture themed deck, and I think this card could be a really nice sideboard option in a lot of scenarios. And then we got to talk about Fell the Dragon, which I think is really, really powerful. This is looking like the strongest Vigilance card in the more, removal sense so far. And this is a 4-resource defeat a non-leader unit with 5 or more power. So if you compare this to Takedown, it's essentially the inverse of Takedown, except, Takedown can hit non-leader, or can hit leaders, where Takedown requires you to have 5 or less toughness, and then this one requires you to have 5 or more power. So this more aptly is a nice comparison against Vanquish, because Vanquish also says non-leader, and normally when you're using Vanquish, you're hitting something with 5 or more power because your Takedown won't be able to kill it, right? So if you're looking at like Avengers, you're looking at maybe Reinforcement Walkers, you're looking at Fett's Fire Spray, all of those get hit by Fell the Dragon, and all of those would not get hit by Takedown, but they would get hit by Vanquish. But Vanquish is 1 more resource. Now Fell the Dragon is a lot more restrictive than Vanquish, but it's 1 less resource, and I think that's going to be extremely relevant. I think that you're still going to run Vanquish because, again, if you are at the point where you're using Vanquish, normally having 1 extra resource doesn't matter. Normally. I've played a lot of blue recently, guys. I've played a lot of Vanquish in my Bobo blues, in my Vader blues, in my Iden blues. Usually having the extra resource doesn't matter a whole lot, but there are some cases where it will. And this could be honestly a really nice sideboard option, or just, straight up running a split of Vanquishes and Fell the Dragons. Next up, we have Outland TIE Vanguard. We have a 2 resource space unit, Command Villainy, 2/1. When played, you may give an experience token to another unit that costs 3 or less. So of course, if you're getting this and you're getting 3/2 worth of stats, 2/1 worth of it in space, this is actually a pretty strong card. But you need to be able to get that experience token. Otherwise, it's just a straight up worse TIE fighter. There's not really much else to talk about in terms of, trying to leverage just the space unit. You really need to get the when played trigger. And so you really need to have some other unit on the battlefield. That makes it a little bit more awkward because you can't really deploy this on turn 1. Otherwise, it's a little bit weak. It's like playing, obviously a mini wing leader. But, with 2 resources and one less experience token, I suppose. So I'm not a huge fan of this, but I do think it can have some strength. Next up, we have, where are you? Remnant Reserve. Search the top 5 cards for up to 3 units, reveal them, and draw them. This one's pretty interesting. It only really works in a heavy, I would say, aggro or mid-range deck, because you're not going to have enough units in your control decks or your soft control decks, or even in some cases your mid-range decks. And getting 3 units is really powerful for 4. The only thing is, if you're playing a more aggro deck with a lot of units, you probably don't want to be playing this because it's too slow. If you're playing a mid-range deck, you need to make sure you're getting the full 3 of. Otherwise, you probably should just play some other cards that can draw you 1 or 2. So I'm not a huge fan of this card. I haven't really been so far of those types of cards, but we'll see, I guess, in the future. Next up, we have a 1 resource ground unit in command, a 2/2 with a trooper tag. Pretty interesting, as I think it works really well with Moff Gideon. Of course, if you were in like IG green, it's just a 2/2 for 1, and it can be relevant because it has the trooper tag, so it works well with like general tag. But other than that, it's just pretty, mediocre. And by the way, if anyone's curious, like, why are you skipping all these other cards? It's because all these other cards we've talked about in previous videos, and if you want to check them out, I got other videos on these cards. There's a lot in here, and we still got to get through a lot more, so I'm going to keep on going. But we have the next one, Scanning Officer. 2/3, 2 resource ground unit in command, and when played, you get to reveal 3 enemy resources and defeat each resource with the smuggle keyword revealed this way. And for each resource, you have to replace it for the top card of their deck. Here's the key with this card. It is a 2 resource 2/3, and that's totally reasonable. Nothing that I'm like ashamed of playing. It's not great, but it's not terrible. The thing I'm excited about this is you can reveal enemy resources, and if you hit like 1 or 2 smuggle cards, not only do you get to remove their potential for smuggling in the future, but you also just completely mess up their turn. Why? Because it does not put the resources into the play readied. So if you go, let's say, Scanning Officer before your opponent's done anything, let's say they draw their hand and they're like, I'm going to resource these 2 smuggle cards on turn 1. And then I'll play this 1 turn 2 or 2 resource play. And then later on, I'll get value out of these smuggle cards. And you go Scanning Officer turn 1. And you defeat both their resources because they want to get their smuggle value. And then they can't play anything because you've essentially played a 2/3 that exhausted both their resources. That is powerful. And that is something that I want to see, and whether or not it's going to happen very frequently, depending on how many smuggle options we are going to have. Next up, we have Kurak's Heavy Fighter, a 3/3 for 4 in the space command. Overwhelm, and on attack, you may exhaust another friendly unit. If you do, this unit gets +3/+0 for this attack. This is a really, really nice aggro card, although it seems a little bit weak, as it's only got 3 points of power in space. You kind of want to have 4 for 4. That's kind of the rate. But the nice thing about this is it allows you to push in damage that you weren't able to before. Like, let's say you didn't really have a great attack, or they have a sentinel down on the ground arena. You can exhaust those units, just give +3/+0 to the Kuraks here, which is really nice. And if there's some sort of unit like a red 3, for example, out on the battlefield, you can really do some crazy stuff where you kill it and you get to overwhelm over for a bunch of extra damage, which can be really nice. I don't think it's insane or anything, but I do think it is a quite solid space option going forward. Next up, we have Discerning Veteran, and this is the card that I was kind of looking for when I was looking at Capture. This is the type of card that I want to see. It's a 5 resource ground unit command, 3/4. When played, this unit captures an enemy non-leader ground unit. This is the card that makes Capture extremely powerful to me. I know He's not a very powerful statted unit. That's exactly what I expected. I've talked about this before when I was talking about Magic, but there are a lot of capture mechanics in Magic. Something that, you know, takes a enemy unit underneath that unit, and until that unit leaves the battlefield, you basically have removed that unit. That is exactly what Discerning Veteran is doing. And the reason why those cards are even playable is because you get a removal spell. It's not as strong as a removal spell, it's just a hard removal spell, not even close. But you get the upside of having extra power in play through having another unit. Now, of course, if your opponent goes take down your Discerning Veteran, they get back their unit, that's pretty poor for you. That's not a great deal, right? But, you know, maybe your 5 resource play would have gotten takedown anyway, so it doesn't really matter, right? It doesn't really matter. And so that's exactly kind of the logic that you have to go in with this. And I think this is the perfect kind of card that you want to run if you are running the capture mechanic. Otherwise, then capture is pretty poor. You really need to get some extra value in terms of aggressing your opponent, and that's what this kind of card does. So I think this is going to be a really interesting one to see if it sees play at all. I think it's pretty good. Here we go. Legal Authority. When played, attached unit captures enemy non-leader unit with less power than it, and it's an upgrade to resource command +0/+2 for the upgrade. So I don't like this one as much as it is nice to get the +0/+2 because it prevents your opponents potentially from killing that unit that captured a unit. But you need to have a high power unit first off. You need your opponents to have a unit, and you need to be able to go ahead and keep that unit alive. And you're not really getting a whole lot of value out of it. So I'm not a huge fan of this, but I do think it is one of the stronger capture cards that we've seen. And I think it lines up pretty, you know, well compared to the other ones that we've seen, maybe a little bit weaker than the Discerning Veteran. Next up, we have Outflank, which is essentially Rebel Assault. It's a 1 resource command event. Attack with 2 units, 1 at a time. And it's just like Rebel Assault, except you don't get +1/+0, but you're not restricted for just Rebels. This card has been really strong, but the Rebel Assault, the reason why Rebel Assault's so powerful is you get to action cheat while giving your units +2 power, essentially, which is really, really powerful. So I don't think this card is really all that good unless we see a huge, like, go wide, you need to get damage in with your units all at once. Next up, we have Moment of Glory. It's just a +4/+0, you know, event for 3 resources in command. These cards are not usually that great, as what ends up happening is, like, if you play this on a unit and your opponent kills it, it's really bad for you. That's why something like Surprise Strike is much better, is because you could do attack immediately with that specific card. Same with something like Shoot First. These like bigger pumps, these like bigger stat boosts, but weaker in terms of you can't actually immediately action. That is usually not good enough. And so I'm not a huge fan of that one. Next up, we have Dengar. I have not went over this one since, last time I talked about spoilers. There's a 1 resource aggression villainy 2/2. When you play an upgrade on a unit, you may deal 1 damage to that unit. So essentially, this works really well with Bosk because you could put some sort of bounty on your opponent's unit, and then your Dengar hits them for 1, and then you can action Bosk to hit them for another 1, and that might just kill a unit and claim your bounty. This card looks really, really sweet. Unlike a lot of other 1-drops that are 2/2s, this card looks actually viable. And the reason why is because it allows you to shrink down your opponent's units to where Dengar can trade, or just straight up kill your opponent's turn 1 plays before they can even interact with Dengar, which is really powerful because of the 0-costed bounty. So I think this card's pretty strong in that Bosk style of bounty collecting deck, which I'm really curious to see. Next up, we have Ruthlessness. Actually, I take it back. I've already talked about Ruthlessness. Let's see here. We have talked about Cripple Authority. There's Reckless Gunslinger. So 1 resource aggression 2/1. When played, deal 1 damage to each base, and its smuggle cost is 3. So this is the type of situation where it's like, I don't know if Lando's going to be all that great because we haven't seen like an amazing smuggle card. And if you're like smuggling out a Reckless Gunslinger, it's like really bad. But the idea behind this card is essentially you play this in your aggro decks like Sabine, for example, and then you just play it later on in the game and you deal 1 damage. That's it. It's just an extra form of reach, and that's something that you can get something out of your resource. You're almost never going to play this on turn 1 because it just dies to everything, and it's a 2/1. It doesn't even hit for that much. It's just pretty weak. It's just giving you that little bit of extra reach later on in the game. Next up, let's see what we got. We've talked about all of these various cards. Millennium Falcon. This one's a 6 resource, 5/5 space unit in Cunning Heroism, And it is, if you play this unit from your hand, you get Ambush, and it's got Smuggle for 6. So this is the best card I've seen with Lando, because you can play this the same turn that Lando comes down. So if you think about what like Sabine curves look like, you go turn 1 Sabine Wren unit, turn 2 you might go like Echo Base Defender, Fighters for Freedom, Red 3, Wing Leader, and you have those options. Then turn 3 you go like General Dodonna, you go K2SO, and you ready up Sabine. Here with Lando, let's say you're playing a yellow red, and you go turn 1 Sabine, turn 2 Wing Leader, turn 3 you ready up Lando, or you action first. You're able to action out a 5/5 in space, which kills everything and hits for a lot of damage, and then you ready up Lando. That is something that I find to be extremely powerful, and that's what I want to see is, are we going to have more of these options? Because if it's just Millennium Falcon, that's a really powerful smuggle option. I don't really see this being all that powerful, but Millennium Falcon is something that I see making Lando really, really strong. So I'm interested to see more of those types of cards. Next up, we have a few more cards to talk about. We got a few in the heroism and villainy category. First up is Incinerator Trooper. This is a 2 resource ground unit in villainy. 2/2, while attacking, this unit deals combat damage before the defender. So this is really interesting. Again, I'm usually not a fan of 2/2s that come down on turn 1. I just think they're too weak. The thing with this unit, however, is if you give it any sort of pump effect, if you get an upgrade, for example, or if you give it some sort of pump, you can essentially kill any unit on the battlefield for the first couple of turns and not lose your Incinerator Trooper, which is really, really good. For example, let's say you are playing villainy and you have Cunning in your deck, and you go Snapshot Reflexes, and you give it +1/+1, and now it is a 3/3 that can suddenly basically kill everything and still live. That is really good, at least for the first couple of turns. However, it does require setup, it requires multiple cards, and that can be a little bit weak. So I'm not like huge on it, but I do think it's a lot better than a lot of the other 2/2s that we've seen. Next up, we have Protector of the Throne. This is a 3 resource heroism 2/4, and when this unit is upgraded, it gains Sentinel. Pretty weak, in my opinion. 3 resource 2/4 is one less stat that I would like to see. If this is a 3 resource 3/4, suddenly we're talking. And suddenly I'm like, ooh, this could be good in your upgrade centric deck to get a nice little Sentinel. Because even if you upgrade this, it becomes like a 3/5, right? Let's say you give it an experience token. Let's say you give it, I don't know, like an actual upgrade, like a Jedi lightsaber, you know, like you're getting some stats, but it's a 2/4. Like, I would just rather upgrade something else, even if it has Sentinel. And of course, your opponent can really easily deal with it. So I'm not sure how great this is. Again, I really wish it had a 3/4 stat line and then we're talking, but of course, that is not the case. Next up, we have Smuggler's Aid. This one's really, really interesting. It's a repair. It's a 1 resource heroism event that heals 3 damage from your base. However, you could smuggle it for a 3. So essentially, you can resource this early, and then later on in the game, you're, maybe light on things to do. You don't have cards in your hand, or maybe you just need to heal some damage from your base, and then you smuggle this out, get some healing going. I think it's actually a pretty strong card in the mid-range, or maybe soft control, hard control styles of deck, where maybe in some matchups you don't care about this, and you just resource it. And then in other matchups, you do care about, but you still are able to resource it and keep your action cards in hand. And then you get to heal up regardless in the later stages of the game, which is really, really interesting. So I'm actually pretty impressed with that card. And then lastly, we have 2 cards here to talk about. We have Mandalorian Warrior, 3 resource, 3/3. When played, you may give an experience token to another Mandalorian unit. So this card looks pretty good if Mandalorians are extremely relevant, because this is a 3 resource, 3/3. And again, I mentioned we wanted 7 points of stats to consider this even average. 8 points of stats is where you're like, okay, that could be good. And this can give you 8 points of stats, right? Because this is a 3/3. And then if you give an experience token to a Mandalorian unit, you now make them +1/+1, which is a total of 4 power, 4 toughness on the battlefield. You can go Sabine Wren into Mandalorian Warrior, and Sabine Wren becomes a 3/4. That's really powerful. So I'm actually decently high on Mandalorian Warrior. I could see this being a really powerful card despite being a colorless card, as it gives you a decent chunk of stats throughout the game. And then Rich Reward. This card looks really good. Attached unit gains bounty. Give an experience token to each of up to 2 units. And that's it. Giving you 2 experience tokens across 2 units. Now, it's each of up to 2, which means you cannot give it to the same unit. You must have 2 units for this card to be really good. But if you have 2 units and you're able to kill something with one of those units, let's say you go turn 1, play your battlefield marine or whatever it is. Turn 2, they play something. They don't really want to trade with your unit or whatever. Or maybe you have the initiative and they just, get their unit killed. You get to go a rich reward, potentially kill their units or something. Whatever happens, if you're able to get 2 experience tokens on your units, this rich reward becomes a really powerful effect. And it also, gives bounty to enemy units. And so if you play like a Dengar turn 1, you can follow it up with a rich reward, ping with Dengar, ping with Boba or a boss. And then you could even just claim this bounty. You turn Dengar into a 3/3 and you also kill their units, right? Let's say they go Viper Probe Droid or something. You just kill it. That's crazy. That's really, really good. And I do think this card can be really powerful. I think you really do want 2 units to get the full effect of it, and actually for it to be really impressive. But I think it still can be used if you're only hitting 1 unit or getting 1 experience token with that unit. So really, really powerful. This, I think, has been a really, really fun time. There's a lot of interesting cards. I think the card that I'm most excited about might be... it's hard to say, but I think it might just be the Discerning Veteran. Not because I think this card's like going to be extremely powerful or anything, but I'm curious to see whether or not this type of effect is going to be useful even when you're getting that body. Or maybe I'm completely wrong, and despite, my years of Magic telling me one thing, I could be completely wrong, and, cards like Take Captive might end up being just extremely powerful regardless. And so that's one of the cards I'm most excited about because of just, the interactions there. And then in terms of power, I forgot to talk about Zori Bliss. Well, we'll talk about her right now. We have a 5 resource Cunning Heroism ground unit, a 4/7 on attack. Draw a card at the start of the regroup phase or discard a card from your hand. This is another one of those cards that you can play with Lando on turn 3, which is really, really nice. The 4/7, pretty high stats to prevent your opponents from just removing it with like a takedown. Also, gets around to Fell the Dragon. But I think this card's pretty mediocre if you're just going to play it as a 5 resource 4/7, as it just isn't good enough in terms of power stats wise. But it is a 4/7. I mean, having that 7 points of toughness can be extremely relevant in some cases. And you do have a little bit of above average stats. Just, having that 4 power oftentimes is a little bit weak. And it just kill things that, come down on turn 4, generally speaking, K2, which is kind of nice. But yeah, I mean, I'm interested to see if this smuggle mechanic is going to be where she comes into play. Yeah, I mean, in terms of power, I think maybe the most powerful card might just be one of the bounties, the 0-costed bounties that we saw. For example, Public Enemy, I think, is really, really powerful. Fell the Dragon looks pretty powerful. I also think that overall, the 0-costed top target or 1-costed top target, I think this card's really powerful. It's more of just like, I think these cheap ways to use cards in your hand really become extremely powerful when you have more ways to leverage your resources, as with the smuggle mechanic and more ways to draw a card. Well, you're going to find that this ends up being something that we can leverage and we can get a lot of value. So I'm excited to see, and let me know what you think about any of the cards or all of the cards in the comment section down below. Am I wrong about anything? What do you think? Am I trolling? You think I'm wrong about something? Let me know. I'll be reading the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. Sorry for the longer video, but lots of cards to go over, and I'll see you all for the next one.